Welcome, lost souls. You've just stepped into Lilith Alaster Official, a place where horror meets passion, and every heartbeat might be your last. If you love eerie tales, dark romance, and spine-tingling short stories that blur the line between the living and the damned, you're in the right place. I publish a new story every week, each one a descent into something a little more unsettling, and maybe a little more beautiful. So if that sounds like your kind of night, leave a like, whisper your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join the growing coven that gathers here every week. And for those who want to go deeper into the darkness, to support my work and unlock extra perks including full ebooks and audiobook versions, you can join my Patreon. The links are in my bio. Thanks so much. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let the story begin. Step into a world where the boundary between science and sorcery dissolves in the humid air of a forgotten greenhouse. When botanist Matea stumbles upon Elena, a girl whose hair is living vines and eyes hold the weight of centuries, she discovers that humanity's obsession with control has awakened something far older than human civilization itself. As corporate mercenaries descend to harvest this impossible life form, Matea faces a terrifying choice: preserve her career or become part of an ancient, pulsing ecosystem that refuses to be contained. This is a visceral journey through a landscape of skeletal crops and sickly glass domes, where the scent of ozone mixes with the sweetness of nectar and death. It explores the profound connection between creator and creation, asking what happens when a scientist realizes she is not observing nature, but rather being observed by it. The tension builds as sterile white suits clash with emerald tendrils, leading to a climax that redefines the very concept of life. Will Matea survive the transformation, or will she become the catalyst for a new dawn? Don't miss this atmospheric tale of resistance, evolution, and the terrifying beauty of nature reclaiming its throne. Click play to witness the moment the last bloom unfurls. Chapter 1. The sedan's engine ticked in the silence, a sound that seemed to Matea more like a countdown than a cooling motor. She sat for a moment, her hands still gripping the steering wheel, watching the dead crops stretch to the horizon like rows of skeletal fingers. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, as if even the color had given up. This place was a graveyard, and she had driven straight into it. She killed the engine. The silence that followed was thick, pressing against her eardrums. Her satchel was heavy on the passenger seat. She grabbed it, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under her boots, a sharp, lonely sound. The air was dry and tasted of dust, but as she walked toward the greenhouse, a different scent began to thread through it. Sweet, cloying, with an edge of something metallic. Ozone, she thought. But it was more than that. It was the smell of a storm that had not yet broken. The greenhouse loomed ahead, a dome of milky glass and rusted iron. It looked sick, like a great glass lung half collapsed into itself. Weeds had claimed the path, their roots cracking the concrete. She pushed open the door, and the hinges screamed in protest. The humidity hit her first. It was a wet, living heat that clung to her skin and made her clothes feel too tight. She drew a breath, and the sweetness was overwhelming. Nectar and ozone and something else, something green and old that she could not name. It was like standing inside a flower in the moment before it closes for the night. Her boots crunched on a carpet of shattered glass and dried leaves. The light inside was green, filtered through algae-thickened panes, casting everything in an underwater gloom. She took a step, then another. The rows of plants were wild, untended, but they were not the plants she knew. A fern twitched as she passed, its fronds jerking like a startled animal. She froze, staring at it. It did not move again, but she felt a prickling at the back of her neck, as if something was watching. She turned. A cluster of pale flowers, their petals like thin, veined skin, were tilted toward her. All of them. They tracked her movement like 1,000 unblinking eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was not botanical. This was wrong. She should leave. She knew she should leave, but her feet carried her deeper. At the center of the greenhouse, the space opened into a clearing. A bed of moss, deep and emerald, covered the floor like a living carpet. And there, sitting cross-legged in the middle of it, was a girl. She was young, perhaps early 20s, but her stillness was ancient. Her skin shimmered, catching the green light in patterns that seemed to shift and breathe. It was not sweat on her skin, it was dew, tiny beads of moisture that never fell. And her hair, Matea's breath caught, was alive. Living vines, thin and supple, coiled and uncoiled in slow, hypnotic waves, moving with a rhythm that had nothing to do with the air currents. The girl opened her eyes. They were deep pools of chlorophyll green, and when they fixed on Matea, she felt as if the ground had dropped away from under her feet. Those eyes were not young. They were old, older than the greenhouse, older than the town, older than anything she had ever known. "You came," the girl said. Her voice was soft, like dry leaves skittering across stone, and it did not seem to come from her mouth so much as from the air around her. Matea felt the sound vibrate in her chest. "Who are you?" Matea whispered. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I am the last of my kind," the girl said. "I have been waiting for someone like you." Matea's scientist's brain screamed at her to run, to document, to call someone. But her body was not listening. She felt a pull, a gravitational force, and she took a step forward. Then another. She extended a gloved hand, a scientist's instinct, a need to make contact, to verify. Her fingers touched the girl's wrist. It was cool and smooth, like river stone worn smooth by centuries of water. A living stone. And then a tendril of ivy, thin and green, snaked up from the moss and wrapped around Matea's arm. The warmth hit her like a wave. It flooded through her veins, spreading up her arm and into her chest, a sensation that was less like heat and more like being recognized. Like the ivy was reading her, mapping her, finding a place for her in its ancient architecture. She gasped. The warmth was a heartbeat, a slow, deep pulse that synchronized with her own. She looked down, and her breath stopped. Roots. Thick, pale roots emerged from the girl's bare feet, burrowing deep into the moss and soil. They pulsed. They pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, and Matea realized with a jolt of pure animal terror that it matched her own heartbeat. 1, 2, 1, 2. She tried to pull her hand back, but her muscles refused. The ivy tightened gently, not a restraint, but an invitation. The girl's eyes held hers, patient. The world outside the glass dome faded. The sounds of the dying town, a distant truck, the wind in the dead crops faded into static, then into nothing. The greenhouse door slammed shut with a sound like a final exhale. Matea felt the familiar world crumbling away, replaced by something else. Something that was already looking through her eyes. Chapter 2. Matea woke to the sound of tires on gravel. It was a wrong sound, too clean, too organized. She had fallen asleep against a mossy bank near the greenhouse wall, her satchel clutched to her chest like a child's toy. Dawn light filtered through the fogged glass, pale and thin, and through it she saw shapes moving. 3 white vans pulled up in perfect formation, their doors opening in unison as if the whole operation were a single organism with many limbs. She stood, her joints aching, and pressed her face to the cold glass. Men and women in sterile white suits stepped out, their boots crunching on gravel that looked too clean for this place, as if someone had washed it. They moved with purpose, unspooling cables, setting up tripods and humming machines. At their center stood a woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes like chips of flint. Her suit was pristine, not a single wrinkle, and she held a tablet like a shield. Matea stumbled outside. The air was cold, still, carrying the stench of diesel and plastic. "You need to leave." The woman's voice was flat, a statement of fact. She did not introduce herself. "This facility is now a containment zone. The subject inside is property of our corporation. You are to vacate immediately." Matea's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Property." The word sat in her stomach like a stone. "I'm a botanist," she managed. "I was studying." "Your study is terminated." The woman, Dr. Reyes, her badge red, did not look up from her tablet. "You have 30 minutes to collect your belongings. After that, you will be escorted off the premises." The machines hummed to life. A pale blue light washed over the greenhouse, and Matea felt it before she heard it, a frequency that vibrated in her teeth, deep in her jaw, settling into her bones like an ache that did not belong there. She pressed her palm to her chest. The vibration was inside her. It was responding to Elena. She watched as the agents aimed scanners at the glass dome, data flickering across their screens. They were mapping her. They were mapping Elena. And Matea felt it in her own body, a resonance that should have been impossible. One of the agents approached the greenhouse door, sampling tweezers in his gloved hand. He stepped inside with the confidence of a man who had never been bitten. Matea wanted to scream a warning. The moment he reached for Elena's vine hair, the plants lashed out. It was not a gentle recoil. It was violence. Thorny tendrils whipped across his forearm, cutting through his suit like paper, drawing a bright line of blood. He staggered back, hissing in pain, and the vines reared up, hissing back, a sound like a nest of disturbed snakes. Dr. Reyes's face did not change. "Containment protocol beta," she said into her headset. "We need a tissue sample. Use the sedative spray." Matea backed away. She watched them set up their perimeter, their plastic sheeting, their humming machines. She watched them treat the greenhouse like a wounded animal to be pacified. She waited until dark. The perimeter fence was flimsy, a temporary thing of metal stakes and orange netting. She found a loose flat near the back, where the agents had been careless, and she crawled through on her belly, the gravel biting into her palms. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. She did not know what she was doing. She only knew she had to get back inside. The greenhouse door groaned when she pushed it open, but no one came. The agents were huddled around a floodlight near the vans, their backs to her. Elena was sitting exactly where she had left her, cross-legged on the moss, her vine hair curling and uncurling in slow, patient waves. Her eyes found Matea in the darkness, green and luminous. "They hurt you," Matea whispered, her voice cracking. "They cannot hurt me," Elena said. Her voice was a rustle, a whisper of leaves. "But they will try. They have always tried." Matea dropped to her knees in front of her. The moss was cool and damp through her trousers. She could still feel the frequency of the scanners humming in her bones, a low thrum that had not stopped since dawn. She pulled off her gloves. The air was warm, thick with that scent of nectar and ozone and something else, something that felt like home. She pressed her bare palm against Elena's. The contact was electric. A shock rippled up her arm, through her shoulder, into her chest, and she gasped. Elena's eyes widened, her vines coiling around Matea's wrist, not a restraint, but an embrace. And then the soil beneath them stirred. Roots rose from the earth. They were pale and thin at first, like threads, but they thickened as they rose, reaching up to thread between their fingers. They slid over Matea's knuckles, weaving through the spaces between her fingers, twining with Elena's. She felt them enter her, not through her skin, but through something deeper, something she did not have a name for. The world fell away. She was in a forest, an ancient forest with trees so tall they scraped a sky of a different color. She felt the rain on her leaves, the sun on her bark, the slow, patient stretch of centuries. She felt the greenhouse being built, the glass rising around her, the experiments that cut and measured and burned. She felt Elena being born, a seed planted in soil that was not her own, watered with chemicals that tasted like poison. And she felt the waiting, the long, patient waiting, for someone who would see. Matea opened her eyes. She was crying, tears sliding down her cheeks, but she did not know when she had started. The roots were still there, woven between her fingers, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Elena leaned forward. Her breath was warm and sweet, like crushed petals. "You were always meant to find me." Matea opened her mouth to speak, but there were no words. Her consciousness was expanding, unraveling, spilling out into the soil, into the roots, into the breathing dark of the greenhouse. She felt the building around her as a living thing, a single organism waking from a long, deep sleep. Outside, the corporate perimeter lights flickered. The scanners hummed their useless frequency. But inside, something stirred beneath the soil. And Matea was no longer just a woman kneeling on moss. She was a seed. Chapter 3. The mobile laboratory arrived at dawn, its white panels gleaming like a fresh wound against the dead fields. Matea watched from the greenhouse's edge as technicians wheeled in monitors, their screens flickering to life with spiraling patterns that twisted in ways that hurt to look at. Elena's genetic code. It looped and coiled on the displays, forming sequences that resembled no known life form, and yet Matea's stomach clenched with a recognition she could not name. She stepped closer to the screen, her breath catching. There, woven into the spirals, were familiar strands. Human DNA. Fragments that matched her own genome with an accuracy that should have been impossible. She stared at the readout, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. It was as if Elena carried a blueprint of her, a mirror held up to her own cells. She was still staring when the agents moved in. They surrounded Elena, their white suits rustling, and two of them knelt beside her with a sterile transport tank. It was a clear cylinder, humming with pale light, designed to hold her suspended in a nutrient solution. Matea's throat tightened. "Do not touch her," she heard herself say, but her voice was thin, lost in the hum of machinery. The agents reached for Elena's roots. They snapped taut, not like roots breaking, but like tendons, like cables under tension. The agents grunted, pulling harder, and Matea felt it. A sharp, tearing pain in her own abdomen, as if something inside her was being ripped from its moorings. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, her vision swimming. Elena's eyes found hers through the chaos, calm, unafraid. Matea straightened, her hand pressed to her gut, and walked toward Dr. Reyes. The woman was standing by a bank of monitors, her tablet glowing, her face unreadable. She did not look up when Matea approached. "You need to stop," Matea said. Her voice was shaking, but she forced it steady. "She's not a specimen. She's a catalyst. If you tear her from the soil, you'll destroy whatever she is." Reyes finally raised her eyes. They were flat, disinterested. "She is a biological asset," she said, her voice clipped. "Her genetic material has applications we have barely begun to understand. Your emotional attachment to her is compromising your judgment." "I'm not emotionally attached. I'm scientifically. You are sentimentally compromised." Reyes's voice cut like a blade. "You are ordered to vacate the site. If you resist, you will be removed." Matea stood there, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to argue, to scream, to make Reyes understand. But the woman had already turned away, her attention back to her screens, dismissing Matea as if she were nothing. That night, Matea crept back to the greenhouse. The perimeter lights were bright, casting harsh shadows, but she found a spot near the back wall where the glass was fogged and the cameras did not reach. She pressed her palm against the cold pane. Elena was inside, sitting in her bed of moss, her vine still and quiet. She looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. The vision hit Matea like a wave. She was standing in a city, but the city was dying. Vines, thicker than her body, crawled up the sides of skyscrapers, cracking concrete, shattering glass. The sky was thick with pollen, a yellow haze that choked the light. And the people, she saw them, their skin splitting open, green shoots pushing through the cracks in their flesh, their eyes going wide and green as leaves unfurled from their sockets. It was not destruction. It was birth. Evolution, vast and patient and utterly indifferent to human will. It was coming. It was already here, moving through the soil, through the air, through the DNA of every living thing. Matea pulled her hand back from the glass as if burned. She stood in the dark, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the image seared into her retinas. She could still feel it, the push of green things under her skin, the slow, patient unfolding of a future that did not include the world she knew. She made her decision in that moment. It was not a choice born of logic or reason. It was a pull, deep in her chest, answering something she could not name. She moved through the corporate camp like a shadow. The mobile lab was humming, its generators thrumming, its monitors glowing with Elena's stolen code. Matea found the power cables running from the generator to the main unit. They were thick, rubber-coated, and she had no tools. She used her teeth to strip the insulation, tasting plastic and copper, and then she took the exposed wires in her bare hands and twisted them together. The spark was bright, violent. It showered her boots with hot metal, and the monitors went dark, one by one, their spiraling patterns dying into blackness. She did not stop. She found the nutrient samples, the sterile vials of solution the agents had prepared for Elena's transport. She unscrewed each one and poured soil from the greenhouse into them, watching it cloud the liquid into a murky brown. She worked quickly, her hands steady, her heart calm. Behind her, corporate alarms began to wail. She did not run. She crouched in the dark, her scientist's hands dirty with soil, and she looked up at the greenhouse. Elena was there, her vines pressing against the glass in patterns that looked like approval, like welcome. Matea felt the pull again, deep in her chest, and she knew that the bridges she had burned tonight would never be rebuilt. Her career, her reputation, her old life, they were already crumbling to dust, scattered on the wind like ash. But there was a new thing growing in their place. A root, perhaps, pushing through the dark soil of her chest, reaching for something patient and green. She stood, her hands still wet with dirt, and walked toward the greenhouse as the alarm screamed behind her. Chapter 4. The tent flap ripped open before Matea could react. Rough hands seized her arms, hauling her to her feet, and she felt the cold bite of plastic zip ties cinching around her wrists. The guards said nothing. Their faces were masks of professional indifference, their rifles slung across their chests. Outside, Dr. Reyes's voice crackled over a radio, distorted by static. Emergency extraction order is confirmed. Repeat, emergency extraction. All units move in. Matea struggled, but the plastic cuffs bit deeper into her skin. She could feel the blood beating along the edges, warm and wet. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency panels flickered on, casting everything in a sickly green glow. And in that dim light, Matea saw them, vines, thick as a finger, slithering through the laboratory vents. They moved with purpose, coiling around electrical panels, their tendrils probing into sockets. A shower of sparks erupted from a monitor, and the screen died. Another followed, then another, the lavatory plunging into darkness punctuated by the hum of emergency generators struggling to keep up. The guards loosened their grip, turning to look. Matea twisted free. She did not think, she did not plan. She simply moved, her body acting on an instinct that was not entirely her own. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor, the plastic cuffs still binding her wrists. She could feel the greenhouse pulling her, a magnetic tug in her chest. She burst into the inner chamber just as the armed agents breached it from the other side. Elena was there, sitting in her pool of nutrient water, the surface still and dark. Her eyes found Matea's, and in them Matea saw no fear, only welcome. The agents raised their rifles. Matea plunged both hands into the water. The cold hit her first, a shock that traveled up her arms and then the roots. They came up from the depths, winding around her wrists, threading between her fingers, pulling her deeper. She felt them enter her not through her skin but through something deeper, a connection that bypassed flesh and bone. The green light erupted from the pool. It was not a gentle glow. It was a detonation, a burst of chlorophyll radiance that flooded the chamber, blinding the agents, sending them stumbling backward with their hands over their eyes. Matea screamed. But the scream was not entirely pain. The shoots came first at her wrists, tiny green tips pushing through her pores, breaking the surface of her skin like seedlings breaking through soil. She watched them emerge, watched the blood bead around each new growth, and the pain was exquisite, each vine tearing through her flesh with a heat that was both agony and ecstasy. They wove through her clothes, threading through the fabric, climbing up her arms and into her hair. She felt them in her scalp, tiny roots burrowing, anchoring. And beneath the pain, there was warmth. It spread through her veins like water into dry soil, filling spaces she had not known were empty. Elena's consciousness flowed into her, not as words or images, but as sensation, as memory, as a deep, patient understanding of seasons and cycles and the slow, steady pulse of the earth. She felt forests growing and dying, felt rain on leaves, felt the sun moving across the sky through centuries. She felt Elena, not as separate, as part of herself. Matea rose from the water. She did not stand. She rose, her body lifting as if buoyed by the green light itself. Vines curled from her arms, leaves sprouted from her scalp, and she felt her eyes change, the irises shifting to a deep, luminous green. She looked at the agents, and they lowered their rifles. One of them took a step back, then another. Dr. Reyes's voice cut through the chaos. "Fire! Fire now!" But the agents did not fire. Elena's voice resonated inside Matea's skull. It was not spoken aloud. It was felt, a vibration that hummed through her bones. "We are one now. The last bloom is beginning." And the greenhouse responded. The walls began to seal. Vines crawled over the glass like living curtains, layer upon layer, blocking out the pale light of dawn. The floor cracked open, roots erupting from the soil, forming a barrier between the transformed women and the retreating agents. The structure groaned and shifted, rearranging itself, defending itself with an ancient purpose that brooked no interference. Outside, sirens wailed. Reinforcements arrived, their headlights cutting through the mist, illuminating a dome that was no longer glass, but a solid mass of green. Impenetrable. Breathing. Matea sank back into the nutrient pool, her body no longer her own. Elena was there, her arms open, and Matea fell into them. The water closed over their heads, warm and thick, and she felt the merge complete itself, two becoming one, the last bloom unfurling in the dark. She closed her eyes, and the world outside faded into silence. Chapter 5. The bullets came in waves, slamming into the thickening vines with dull, wet thuds. Each impact was absorbed, swallowed by layers of green that knitted together faster than the agents could reload. The glass disappeared behind living armor, pane by pane, until the entire dome was a solid mass of interwoven stems and leaves, pulsing with a faint, internal light. Matea heard the gunfire as if from a great distance. It was a muffled percussion, a rhythm that had no meaning here, inside the sealed world. She stood with her hands raised, watching the light move beneath her skin. It was pale green, pulsing in time with a heartbeat that was not entirely her own. She could see the veins in her arms, glowing, carrying something that was no longer just blood. The sensation was not frightening. It was like waking from a long dream into a body that finally fit. Elena appeared beside her. She was not walking toward her. She simply was there, emerging from the green light as if she had always been part of it. Her form flickered, shifting between the girl Matea had first touched and something vaster, a canopy of branches and leaves, a silhouette of chlorophyll light that breathed with the rhythm of a forest. She smiled, and the smile was patient, stretching across centuries. Together they turned to watch through the living glass. Outside, the corporate world scrambled. The figures in white suits were small, impotent, their shouts muffled by the green barrier. Dr. Reyes stood at the front, her fist hammering against the sealed glass, her mouth open in a scream that Matea could not hear. The scanners flickered uselessly. The weapons hung silent at the agent's sides. They were ants, beating against a wall that would never break. Elena's voice came not through the air but through the soil, through the roots that now connected them, through the shared network of their merged consciousness. It was a rustle, a whisper of 1,000 leaves. They chose control over evolution. Now they will inherit the silence. Matea felt the weight of those words settle into her bones like a seed taking root. She understood, suddenly, with a clarity that was not her own, the centuries of patience that had led to this moment, the forests that had spanned continents, breathing as one organism, the ecosystems that had thrived in perfect balance, and then the slow poison, the blight of exploitation spreading through the world like decay through fruit. Humanity had been offered a choice. They had chosen wrong. She looked down at her hands. The skin was translucent now, the green veins pulsing beneath. She could see the structure of her bones, faint and glowing, as if her entire body were becoming light. The sensation was not dissolution, it was expansion. She felt her feet. The roots were extending from them, pushing through the soil below, burrowing deep into the earth. She felt the texture of the dirt, the minerals, the tiny lives that moved through the dark. She felt the weight of the greenhouse above her, the tension in its frame, the slow pulse of its living walls. She was becoming the greenhouse. Her fingers reached up, and vines extended from them, climbing toward the glass, weaving into the living armor. She felt the structure of the dome as if it were her own skeleton, the panes of glass as if they were her own skin. Every leaf, every stem, every root was an extension of her being. Elena's form flickered beside her, and for a moment Matea saw her as she truly was, not a girl but a nexus, a convergence of all that had been and all that could have been. Her eyes held forests, her hair was a canopy, her breath was the wind that moved through the branches of the world. "Are you ready?" Elena asked. Her voice was a question and a statement, a beginning and an end. Matea did not answer with words. She opened herself, let the light fill her completely, let her identity spread like mycelium through the entire structure. She felt the greenhouse become her body, felt the roots become her limbs, felt the leaves become her thoughts. The light flared. It rose from the dome in a pulse of chlorophyll green, so brilliant it bleached the world outside to white. The agents screamed, shielding their eyes, stumbling backward as the dome flared like a dying star. Dr. Reyes fell to her knees, her hands pressed to her face, her body a dark silhouette against the radiance. And then the light faded. The wind carried the silence across the dying town. The agents lowered their hands, blinking, their eyes adjusting to the dim gray of dawn. The greenhouse stood before them, sealed, impenetrable. Through the living glass they could see nothing. No figures. No movement. Only stillness. The scent of crushed petals drifted through the bullet holes in the outer vines, sweet and faint, a ghost of what had been. Inside, Matea and Elena sank into the soil together. Their forms dissolved, merging with the roots, the stems, the leaves, becoming the greenhouse itself. Two souls, fused into one eternal bloom, waiting inside their sealed world. The last bloom of a dying world, waiting for a future that would never arrive.